Okay, so this session is about the curl options and what they opened for us when we started using them in insert from URL. It's a session that will give you an overview of how we do things, and we're going to talk about a framework that I use over and over again to use any web service. It's not in-depth session, so if your level of coding is win the court, leave the room now. Otherwise, I'm very happy for you to stay. Okay, so how I ended up here. So I've been working in integration for a long time. I've been speaking about integration at DevCon in the past. At the beginning, it felt like I had to justify why I was talking about integration. And now, for the first time, FileMaker has a full track titled integration, which means that we're getting somewhere in this direction. Integration means many things. In this case, it will be just FileMaker trying to talk to web services and not the other way around. I don't know if you saw other integration sessions. It's a big umbrella. This is really FileMaker trying to talk to technology that don't speak FileMaker. If it sounds weird that I come from Australia, but I have these accents, you're not wrong. If you meet any other Australian around here, they will tell you why. Okay, let's get started with the serious stuff. One thing, I see quite a few of you have laptops, which is great. There will be a game at the end, and you will need laptops. So if you feel like popping the laptop out, I'm not offended, but you will need something to participate. Okay, so this is the overview of the session. What we're gonna just look at, what is this curl that we keep hearing over and over again, and why it's now so important in FileMaker. We're gonna talk, as I said, about a framework which is not pure coding, it's more like an approach to how you can tackle every single web service, from the simplest one to the most complex one with very hard authentication. The steps are always the same. And then we're going to put all together and have a real-world example of a real client that I worked with. So let's start. What is curl? Well, curl comes in two main flavors. One is called curl and one is called libcurl. The purpose of curl is to be able to talk to anything on any protocol where a resource can be specified as a URL. So simplest example is a browser, but there's security, there's many protocols. Curl is not a new thing. It was started in '96, and then it was renamed curl in '98. So curl is already 20 years old, like me, and wasn't the first joke. And yeah, it came in two flavors. One is a command line tool, and one is a library. So that library has been powering FileMaker for a lot longer than we know. In fact, it was the library behind insert from URL even before the curl options were exposed. FileMaker, at the beginning in FileMaker 12, started with this insert from URL, but was really limited. We could only get something from the web, and we couldn't specify any specific parameter or headers. Only in the URL we could add parameters. In 13, they kind of shoved in post using what we had, and so it was a limited post where we couldn't add neither body or header. This slide is slightly incorrect. It says no fun, but back then the fun was to figure out how to do things. Okay, so then FileMaker 16 arrived, and these two slides will just show you the big difference. It's just a little button. If you think about all the stuff that's been added to FileMaker in the last two versions, that doesn't really look that impressive, right? It's just a new button. It's just a new option. Well, that thing opened for people that started using it, all the resources in the world. That is, of course, me on top of a rock. And another way of reading this slide is that FileMaker is my rock. jokes apart, like that little button opened really the sky of everything that is available on web services for us. Of course, we could do that before with plugins, but now it's all native in FileMaker, works in FileMaker Go, and so on. All right, so what are these cURL options? Write it down. I'm going to show this slide only once, and we're going to cover all of them. There are more than 200 options in cURL, but FileMaker supports a subset of them. It's a choice. They didn't rewrite the library. They used the library, but they chose to, for now, support only HTTPS and FTPS. We don't know if anything else is going to come in the future. There is a main difference from whatever documentation you will read about cURL outside of the world of FileMaker and how cURL works in FileMaker, and is that cURL can write to the file system and to the standard out. So normally, some of the cURL options will let you write to a file or write to the screen. In FileMaker, this library is packaged behind FileMaker. So the only two ways of getting the result out are in a variable or in a field. So remember this difference. It's not big, but yeah, you won't be able to write to a file right away. You will have to pre-process with FileMaker. So before we start, we'll start with a demo straight away before we start with the boring part of understanding how to do things. So I'm pretty sure that everybody is familiar with the FileMaker community. So I'm going to go to the FileMaker community here. OK, so as you can see, I'm not logged in. Right? So I didn't log into the FileMaker community. But if I go to this FileMaker file, we're just going to create a discussion board on the FileMaker community from FileMaker, where you can post questions that we're going to download at the end from the community to FileMaker. OK? And I'm going to show you how we do it. So let's find a title. So, and then. OK, text. And then tags. So I don't know if you ever noticed, but the discussions on the community have little tags at the bottom that help in the search. So let's say that we use DevCon 2018, and please send help. And I just clicked on create. It says discussion created. Let's go here and just refresh the page. And we are top of the list, OK? And we created this from FileMaker. I didn't do anything in the actual web browser. We're going to look. Wait for me. We'll see. OK, so yeah, feel free to post questions there. We're going to download them at the end. We're going to look at this code at the end. I know it's a bit silly, but I really needed to have this one up there so you can post questions. While I was testing this to get ready for my session, I kept creating discussion and deleting them. So if any of you was really attentive on the community, there were weird boards coming up and down, probably, hopefully, no one noticed. OK, so let's have a look at the first cURL options. We're not gonna look at many of them, less than 10. These three are the three that let us do most of the hard work. The top one, the header one, is that rock that we saw in that slide before. That is the one that opened us the sky. Why? It's because most web services need context, need to know who we are, what we want to do. They can't just work with the request. They need to understand the context of the request. And that header option let us specify that context. Data, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's the body, it's the payload of our request. So it's what we want to send to the web service. Request, that is a bit particular. So curl is normally very good at guessing what method we want to use, like if we want to get something, if we want to post something, if we want to update something. But sometimes the web services are not implemented in the same way that curl expects them, so we can force curl to use a specific type of request. One famous example is Dropbox. Dropbox uses the method, the HTTP method post, even when we have to do a get. So you will have to specify to curl, I want you to use a post, even if you believe that get is a good idea. I'm not going to start talking about documentation, because that could be a session all in itself. Documentation is not written for humans for some reason. So integrating with web services is never a one-try kind of thing. It's a trial and error kind of thing. So these three options are the best three to help you debug your code and find out what's not working in your application. So trace dumps the whole trace stack of that communication into a variable or a field. That means that you will see everything that FileMaker tried to do via curl and everything that the web service sent back, from the handshake to the data to the response. One thing to keep in mind is that there will be everything, which means that if you pass some body where there are, for instance, documents in base64 in there, your trace will be big, because the base64 will be also in the trace. Dump headers, so you know how we talked about header before, that is to send up headers. Dump headers is to receive the header of them from the web service. It's like a response code that lets us know if the request was successful or not, so that then we can decide if we need to process the data or try something else. And head does the same thing, but instead of returning whatever the response from the web service is, it just returns this response code. So you can use it just to test. The use case that we're going to look at is a real project. It's actually a mishmash of many different projects. We're going to have a merchandise, a promotional shop, and we want to receive inquiries from our client via an online form. We want to put together an artwork preview, a document that they will have to sign off, and this signature will be legally binding. Is done through DocuSign, if any of you has worked or seen DocuSign. And then we're going to just upload our graphics to Dropbox so that our printing team will be able to print the gadgets for us. So let's get started. For the forms, we're going to use a platform called JotForm. I don't know if you saw it. It's a very easy platform. You can put together your own form in minutes, and then it's just on the web. So this is the FileMaker file where we're going to retrieve the data. And this is the form. Okay, so I just created a little request for quote. So I'm going to say, okay, my name is Brad Freitag, and my email, we're going to cheat because I don't think that Brad is in this room, so he's not going to be able to help us. And I'm organizing a little thing called DevCon. Okay, and then we need a logo. Let's say that we use this logo. If you don't know who he is, he's a good friend and has done a lot of things for FileMaker in Australia. All right, so this has been submitted, and let's go back to our FileMaker file. And let's get the form submission, and bam, it came. Okay, so that form is not being sent to FileMaker. It's been uploaded to JotForm, and now I pulled down from JotForm. Let's have a quick look at the code. Okay, is it big enough? Okay. I'm not sure how to make it bigger for you now. Yeah, tried that, but let's try again. Yeah. You sure it's not big enough? No. Sorry, guys. I'm not going to lose too much time on this. I really hope that at least a few of you can read it. Yes. Yeah. So it starts with yeah. So the idea of that is not really to understand the details of that code right now. It's more about the structure of that code. That is the idea of the framework that I was talking about before. So every script that we'll see today, no matter what the result is, uploading a whole PDF document, downloading a form, playing with images, will have exactly the same structure. Actually, the funny story is that when pause on error was on, I just checked if someone was doing sessions on integration, and I saw that there was one session. I think there was Brian and Colleen doing a session on integration, and I checked their code, and was exactly the same steps in the same way, maybe even the same spaces. So I called them and I said, did we use each other codes somehow? Like we never spoke before. So I was pretty surprised by the thing, but that means that probably this is the right way of doing things. So the first block will always be some kind of authentication. Authentication can be simple or really hard, and we're going to look at various examples today. In this case, it's just a little API key. It's just a string of text that we're adding to a header. The next block is always some parameters that are specific to that web service. And then we normally specify what the URL where we want to send or retrieve that kind of information is. And then if there is a body where we want to add the data to the request, that's where we create it. And then we just process the request and we parse the result. So authentication, parameters, destination, body, and then we do it. Okay? Remember this sequence, we'll see it over and over again. In the case of JotForm, what we do is that we create that little API key. The only parameters that we need is to know that that form that I'm using is that number. And then I'm just going to put together the URL with that form number, and then insert from URL and just create my request and retrieve whatever the image is. And all the blocks, we think that the hard part is the web service integration. So the first 23 lines, not even, the first 21 lines are the web service integration, and all the rest is just to put my stuff in the right place in FileMaker. Okay? So the web service integration is only this part here. Okay, so again, don't pay too much attention to the details of that screen, because you can read them, but think more about the framework. Some other cURL options. So there is one cURL option called location, which is pretty important. It's becoming more and more common. So, often the URL that is given to us in the documentation, or the URL that we are supposed to call, is not the URL that is going to follow up on our request. Sometimes our request is bounced around between a few URLs until the last one does what we want. cURL, by default, doesn't follow this bounce around. So it will go to the first one, and it will just return code that says, I'm going to be bounced around, and that's everything that we are receiving from that, which is correct, but it's not what we want. Adding that -L or --, location will tell cURL, I want you to follow the bounce around. One thing related to this is that if you use those dump headers function options that we talked about before, if there is a redirect following location, those headers will contain every single header of this redirect. So if you're trying to check if your response code, if the status code of the request is like successful, which is a code 200, you have to look at the last one, because if you look at the first one, if your code says is the first one 200? It will be no, even if your request is correct, because it will be redirect code, redirect code, redirect code, until you have a success. So just keep that in mind. It's one of those things where someone has to spend a few hours on it and then tell you so you don't. Output just gives a name to a file when we download it. So in that case, I put that logo, that image in a container, and I just wanted to specify a file name. So I used the option -o. Cookie. We're not going to use cookie today, but Steve Winter used it last year. A lot of authentication go through the headers. Some authentication add to the headers, passing a cookie. It's still a header. It's called a cookie header. It is the same thing that your browser uses when you say remember me and you tick the box. And same way, some web services use that to identify you. Lots of talking about authentication and authorization. What are they in basic terms? A trick that I use to remember the difference is to think about FileMaker privilege sets and FileMaker accounts. So authentication just tells the system, who am I? It's like the account in FileMaker, username and password. Authorization, what can I do in your system? What resources I'm allowed to play with, which is the privilege set in FileMaker. So exactly the same structure. Authorization is sometimes complex. Like last year, I did a demo with Amazon Web Services. You will see a few of them around this year as well. Like Wim de Kort was using them, and I think Jesse Barnum is going to use them. And that authentication was really difficult. It's a step process that takes a custom function and a full script just for the authentication. And again, it's one of those things that you're happy that someone else did for you. Some are simple, some are just a token, like the JOT form that we saw before. Some are, at this stage, impossible to do only in FileMaker. And we're going to see an example of them, which is DocuSign. Okay? So DocuSign uses an authentication called Auth2 using JWT, JSON Web Token. And FileMaker provides us all the tools to do this, except the last bit, which is the most frustrating part, of course. To do that, I use a trick. I'll share it with you, and you will be able to use it. But yeah, we'll see why I'm saying that we can do all of it in FileMaker. So let's go to DocuSign. As I said, we are a merchandising company, so let's just create a project for our client. DevCon company, it will be FileMaker. The content is Brad, and the email, again, I'm going to use mine. Okay, so we're going to choose some products for this event. Let's say that we want a hat and a ducky. And I'm going to use our logo again. So we're going to just preview things. And so the merchandising is ready. Yeah, and we're just creating a document for our client to know, what they're going to expect from our products. I've just created a PDF. It's just old FileMaker. Okay? We're going to send a document to our client. Did you see that ugly screen? That is the authentication. So we're going to have a look at that. If I now share my emails with you, an email from DocuSign anytime now. Yep. So DocuSign is sending me a document saying, someone has sent you this document. It's just a PDF. Sign here and sign here. DocuSign stores this and encrypts these signatures, and then that is a signed contract. So then I can go forward and mass produce those heads and duckies. So I'm gonna say here, and that document is signed, okay? All this happened outside of FileMaker, okay? This is a PDF document. It's saved in the DocuSign of the vendor. The vendor received an email notification saying the client has signed the document, okay? All done outside of FileMaker, but everything has been created in FileMaker. Does it make sense? Yeah? Let's have a look at that code. Control Option E. If there is anyone that knows about computers here, please. Sorry, guys, it's not cooperating. Do you recognize this structure? It's authentication, web service parameters, URL, body, and then we do the call. But instead of being a one-liner, our authentication logic is a full script, okay? That is because to create the signature, like to create the authentication for this specific web service, DocuSign gives us 3 things, and then gives us steps to put them together, base64 them together, and then merge them with a function called RS256, which is the one missing in FileMaker, and then create something that we can sign our request with. So I'm gonna show you the code. Is one of those layouts that does the job without being pretty. So the trick that I used, Steve Winter last year used a different trick. I'm going to talk about that as well. But the trick that I use is that there are a lot of PHP libraries that do this merging at the end, this function. So what I did is that I put together all the requests in FileMaker, but then I pass it to a web viewer. And what the web viewer does, it just uses whatever text I'm passing to it and send back the signature, okay? So this has been shared already online a few times, but if anyone needs to integrate with something that uses JWT, let me know, and this is all yours, colors included. So what happens there is that these are the parameters that are given to me. They are merged together just via base64 into a signature, and that signature is used to generate a token through that library. The approach that Steve Winter used last year was very similar, but he just put the PHP library in a web server, so he had the little web server on his machine, so every time he needed to sign something, he was doing a call to the web servers and back. The server was sending back the signature. I really liked to package everything in FileMaker. Again, it's a bit of a fiddly thing to use a web viewer to have a request back, but yeah, it's I felt it was more portable this way. So there are advantages in both approaches, of course. Going back to the slide. So yeah, this Auth2 and JWT that we spoke about. If you look on the web, there's a lot of confusion. A lot of articles talk about Auth2 versus JWT, like if they were 2 different ways of authenticating. But in reality, Auth2 is like a framework. It's not an exact protocol. It's just a way that Auth told us how to do things. And one specific implementation uses JWT. So those steps there are the normal sequence of our Auth2. We have to grant consent. It normally happens in the website of the system. Like on DocuSign, we say, yeah, this user is going to be able to do requests they give us some parameters. So there's a couple of keys, a private key and an identifier. And with those, we mix them together using what they call a recipe, and we create a JWT. That token is signed with our private key. We send a token, and we get back a token that we can use for the signature. If you are confused now, imagine when I did that. Like it was a long process through. Let's have a visual look. Okay. A JWT is composed by 3 parts. There's a header, a body, and a signature. So the header and the body are just JSON. They're just put together as JSON, and they identify the type of auth to request that we want to do. The ISS, sub, and private key are the things that we need to know, and are the thing that really identify us. The other thing are like just how long this is going to be valid for, the website we're going to send it to, but those 3 are the things that tell the system who we are. And then, as I said, that is just a made-up name. It's not a name of a real function that we call, but it's the library that I had to use in the web viewer to make this work. That is the only bit that I couldn't do in FileMaker, okay? All right, so now we have our clients signed up our art approval, so we're gonna just send our document to Dropbox. Okay, so we have our logo there, and I'm gonna show you my Dropbox folder. So there's a folder, it's empty there. Oh, okay. So it says, I told you to rehearse your session. Error in call, API function, file upload, HTTP header. So let's see. Well, I know you don't believe me, but I put that error on purpose. So what happened there is that I wanted to show you some of the common mistakes that happen when we do web services. Again, I'm really sorry for the small font. The difference between these 2 is that one parameter, which is a parameter called mute, is set up in the one that I just ran is set up as a string, but the web service expected as a Boolean. It needs to be true. It doesn't need to be the word true. It needs to be true or false. Those 3rd parameter, whenever we do a JSON set element, there's a 3rd parameter that is normally kind of an afterthought. We think about our key, we think about a value, and then, yeah, that comes natural. If you get that wrong, probably your JSON will be refused by the web service. So this was just an example of that. Of course, when you do this kind of funny trick, remember that you did it, otherwise you'll spend 2 hours to debug your own code. True story. All right, so let's upload it. Okay, so the most observant would have noticed that there was a 2nd commented line there. The other thing is something that Steve Winter touched on last year as well. We need to escape a lot of the slash in our code, and we do that already for FileMaker sometimes when we have to show like quotes and slash. But if you only escape it like you do it for FileMaker and you put that code in the body of your request, that is not going to be enough because it's going to be evaluated and it's going to fail in JSON. So we normally need to double escape thing. Okay, so I'll show you in a slide in 1 second. But yeah, I think that Steve Winter called it the mega escape last year. So it's slash 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 and something. Let's go back.
Can I help you with the Zoom?
Sure.
Go to your system preferences.
You want to use my computer? Okay. Oh, it worked when you touched it. So now we're gonna. Sorry, I'm gonna just check. Yeah, I'm gonna just check Dropbox for a second, and then I'm gonna hand off the computer to you.
Very quick.
Okay, so you create a folder, and the file is in there, okay? I really hope that David never sees the recording of this. He's there, he's there. Not just you, me as well. All right, so this worked. So we uploaded our document to Dropbox. The Dropbox integration was nothing different from the others. I didn't show you the code, but was, again, authentication, parameter, body, URL, and the call. But why I showed you that with those 2 errors that I made up, I did the errors and then I corrected them, because I wanted to show you what, I might try to make it simple for you because I really want you to try and integrate with web services, but I don't want you to then try and get frustrated and give up. So the common thing that happened is this, the integration in real life. So you read the documentation, they give you an example, it works, you try it and it works, and you look like that, you're happy, and you say, okay, let's do more, it does work. And then you test the API with a slightly change with your own data, and 2 hours later, you're like that, looking at the computer, and you get more and more frustrated. Why is that? So one of the common issues, so the first one is the one that we saw in Dropbox, is what I call the / quote or mega escape. So you see that request on the left looks pretty good, like I'm passing a data parameter and I'm escaping all my quotes there. But if you look on the right, both the quote after the D and the quote before the O of order are the same, which means that the parameter which should be inside the first quote, and it doesn't work. It is like the parameter ends with only the curly brace. So the right way of doing that is the double escape. So the first one escapes the slash, and the second one escapes the quote. So on the right-hand side, that's how it's interpreted by the JSON. Another one is header with space. So FileMaker gave us a good habit of not caring about spaces, because the calculation engine doesn't really care about spaces. But if you do that, cURL is going to think that your header stops at the colon, okay? So it's going to be an incomplete header. cURL is not going to understand what you're doing there. The right way of doing that is either to remove that space, or even better, to just wrap the whole header into quotes. Third one, which I love every time I receive emails from someone, Logan, if you're in the room, this is you, is it works when I do it once, but when I do it in a loop, it breaks. And the problem, which you're doing a big complex thing, the problem comes down to a comma. And it's because looping, you add a comma every time you want to add a sub-block, but if you add the comma also to the last one, the JSON will be invalid and it's going to break. So it's just a little trick. If you keep adding items in a sub-block of JSON, remember not to add the quote at the very last one. Okay? Okay, so let's play a game. This is now the time where you can use the laptop. So I showed you a few ways of doing things. That is the URL that you can call via insert from URL. You need to send, there's no authentication, so no header needed, but you can send a body with your name and the secret key, which is just the code of this session, ITG05, okay? I really hope that you're not quicker than me. So I'll show you the URL again up there. So the first one that sends something there will appear under the gold medal, and there is actually a prize for you. If in 3 minutes it didn't happen, I'll show you the code and I'll win it myself. If you're close, just wave to me. So no one is close. Ah. If no one, are you getting some PHP errors? Maybe someone won in the next door room. No one? Well, I'm going to show you the code, and then we're going to come back there and see if anyone won while we were away. So I'm going to win it myself then, and I'm going to run the script just to show you. And if I can. Of course, something broke now, and I don't see my name. I'll show you the script anyway, and using my new powerful knowledge. This is maybe the first time that you see this framework. Say, I had to specify some web service specific parameter, say my name and the secret. I had to specify the URL where those parameters are sent. And I had to specify the body of my request, which is just those parameters put together via JSON. And then I just did my request with the insert from URL down there. Okay, and then just if we have a look at the options, you see all those options we talked about are in there. So there's the post, there's the body, and there's the trace and the headers to give me an idea of if everything went well or not. And then I can look at them to see if my response code was 200, and I can decide if the code was good or not. You remember that first board that we created? Let's look if anyone had questions there. There are comments downloaded. Okay, so as you see, this is just another integration. Probably that one is a typo. Someone wanted to say, you really look 20. Yes, the tracker will be available at the end of the session. It's here. But yeah, I wasn't able to print the docu. All right, if there is any, when specifying the cURL option, is it accepted to leave them as a list of values? Or do we need to substitute return with spaces? cURL will look at the spaces as if they are meaningful. So I wouldn't play with, it would probably work, but I normally try to keep them in a line. cURL doesn't interpret the return as a meaningful character, but you never know, if you're going to break something in your request. So I normally put them in a line. Please send the demo files for the DocuSign setup. Yes, I will. Everything will be uploaded except my private keys, because I don't trust you, but everything else will be uploaded. Okay, there's no other question there, just for to show you that we are actually downloading from the actual discussion, and it's not some friends that created it through FileMaker. So authentication, I had a token, a specific parameter, just the content ID of that discussion, the URL where we want to send a request, option, there's a header there, two things that, to create that context that we were talking about. And then I'm just dumping the headers and the trace, again, into variables so I can look at what happened. Then I do my insert from URL, and then I just post-process it. So that is it. That's everything I wanted to talk to you about today. If there is any question that didn't go through the board, feel free to come to the mic and ask a question. Otherwise, thank you. I hope you learned something else than just Zooming today. And and feel free to ask me any question, even outside of the room. Thank you. Again, if you have any questions, just feel free to come to the mic, so the question will be recorded in the recorded session.
Hi.
Hello.
First off, great lecture. This is very helpful and really enjoyed it. In a practical sense, once you make send a call to the API, what do you typically store as a response in FileMaker? Do you store the entire response, or? Just in a general standardization type.
So I tend to work a lot with variables because a lot of the time, all the JSON code that comes back is not going to be useful in FileMaker after you parsed it and you created your own stuff. So I normally tend to put things into variables. But there are cases where you need a history of the request that you've done, and so that you can go back and the JSON function are now so powerful that you could use that as a historical of your request. And one of our actual clients saves every single request they do because they need to know if it was successful or not. These services are not that strict. If I wasn't able to upload the photo the first time, I would just try a second time. But you might have web services that move machinery or something where you really need to know if it worked or not, and you need a history of what worked or not. So in that case, you might want to store it in a field and keep it as a history.
Thanks very much. It's kind of beyond the scope of what you were talking about, but just thinking about as you're building on it and making things more complex.
Yep.
Subjective question, do you have all this stuff? It's only in the scripting, or do you find the need to make tables or fields for...
like specific tables just for the integrations?
Yeah.
So mostly depends on the type of authentication. In terms of the data, is linked to the reply that I had before. In terms of the data, once I parse that data, I just use the FileMaker fields. But in terms of authentication, I often need some specific fields to store some keys or some...
Or the calls? Like, do you store any of the sort of the functions, like API?
Yeah. So for instance, for the AWS 4, we had a custom function because it was a series of things that we were doing over and over and over again. Or even sometimes, actually pretty often, to have a single point of entry for my secret key, for my token, I just use a custom function that only returns the token. It's not a very powerful custom function, it just does one thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so normally I don't know if you noticed, but in every one of my scripts, the first authentication thing was just referencing a custom function that was my secret token. So I don't have to expose it in the script.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, about 8 years ago, I was doing eBay integration using the Scriptmaster plugin and a PostScript or HTTP PostScript that they had as part of it. How would you say that the new system with cURL and JSON compares with doing it that way?
Via plugin.
Right.
As you might know, I work for a company that does a plugin, so I'm not going to go into specifics. In terms of calls with HTTP and HTTPS, so the four or the two protocols that FileMaker decided to support, insert from URL now can do everything that you were able to do with the plugin, but all the plugins that support the cURL library are letting you using other protocols as well. So that is the main difference. If a web service is not on HTTP but is on something else, you will still need a plugin. For instance, INAP is another protocol supported by cURL. You can do it with some plugins. You can't do it with your insert from URL. Okay, so things like that. One of the basic example of cURL is to use a dictionary, but the protocol, the RCT, is not supported by FileMaker. So all that, you will still need a plugin. But in terms of HTTP calls, insert from URL is now as powerful as a plugin.
Right, I wasn't thinking about that so much as just the experience of having to go through, sanitize your outputs and so forth.
Yeah, and again, the other thing that was missing before was those JSON functions, and now we have those JSON functions. So when you have your output, you can parse it. Of course, if a web service doesn't use JSON but uses something else, XML, and sends you the response in XML, to sanitize that, either use custom function or you're better off using a plugin that has XML function because we don't have them in FileMaker. So again, in the specific case, you will still need to use a plugin, or you might prefer to use a plugin, but in the overall HTTP JSON environment, insert from URL is as powerful as anything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No more question. I think that there's a coffee break, so I'm sure that everybody wants to go there. So thanks for coming. I'll see you around.